Good evening. Okay, so I'm jumping on really quickly to talk about the Diddy trial and seeing some of the comments that I've been seeing and the questions that I've been noticing that people have been asking. One of the most blaring things that I'm seeing is this continued question or comment about why did Cassie testify, or why did she need to testify, and what was the point of her testimony, and this is a RICO act, so why are they talking about domestic violence, and you all are missing the whole point of what RICO is. Okay, so first of all, remember that RICO is an acronym for multiple things. RICO is considered the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, and it looks at fraudulent or dishonest conduct in a business enterprise that has various crimes involved in it. It's not one thing, it's multiple crimes, and these multiple crimes can include anything from sex trafficking to kidnapping, forced labor, transporting individuals across state lines, transporting drugs across state lines, and doing this within a business enterprise. And so in that vessel, this means that we're looking at multiple different crimes that prosecution has to prove has occurred in order for them to demonstrate that, in this case, Diddy has committed these acts and as such violated the RICO Act. And so when you're seeing testimony from Cassie, this is one component of proving the RICO Act violation. Ultimately, the RICO Act is overt acts in furtherance of a criminal enterprise, which means out with things that has to occur in furtherance of that. And so Cassie testimony is pivotal and very important to this case and this trial, because it is establishing a basis for things like coercion and being forced into sexual acts and physical assault and being transported across state lines to engage in sexual acts that she did not 100% agree to, and bribery and multiple other things. And so we're not looking at a domestic violence case per se when she's testifying. You're looking at the justification of acts being committed towards the RICO Act violation. And so, there are elements that have to be met in a RICO Act. And in the New York State law, the elements that have to be met includes one, there has to be an enterprise. And so the enterprise could be considered anything from, they could be arguing that the Bad Boys record label as a whole is the enterprise, or they could be arguing that the freak-offs that Diddy had in those type of parties was the enterprise. Whichever one, I don't specifically know how they're establishing that, but they're establishing one, that there has been an enterprise. And then the second element is that within that enterprise, the actions have to affect interstate commerce. And so interstate commerce means things crossing state lines. And so when things leave outside of New York City, for instance, the incident that happened and was recorded with Cassie in another state, that's considered affecting the interstate commerce because it happened in another state. And in the process of that action happening, not only was there physical assault, but there was also, per the testimonies, the use of drugs and alcohol and different things, escorts being brought across those state lines and being paid, which is considered prostitution. And so you have these multiple factors that are proving, one, that there's an enterprise, and two, that it affects interstate commerce because it happened across the state line. Another element is that, there has to be a defendant that's associated with the enterprise. Diddy is that defendant that is being associated with the enterprise. And so another reason for the testimony is that Cassie's testimony directly connects Diddy to the actions that they are trying to prove were committed, not only just across state lines, but in the state of New York that has affected the RICO Act. And so that testimony is necessary to say, yes, it was him and this is what he did. And then the next element is that the defendant has to engage in a pattern of racketeering. And so it has to be two or more acts that have occurred across or within a 10-year period. And so one, establishing, the actions of the physical assault that you saw, but also the acts that the other individuals are testifying about as far as the freak-offs, proves the two or more acts. In addition to that, the long-standing period of those acts happening within a 10-year period proves that element as well. And so they're establishing, the prosecution is establishing a very strong case to justify the presence of a violation of the RICO Act. And so connecting Diddy to that would be the defendant engaging in this pattern of racketeering activity, which is necessary for this element to be proven. And so, these activities include everything from obscene matters to kidnapping, bribery. And so when they have Cassie testifying, she can testify to things like the kidnapping, because the video shows her attempting to leave and her being beaten and drugged back to the room, which is being held against her will, which is an element that could be considered a part of kidnapping. When there are conversations about the fact that she was on a monthly allowance and consistently drugged up and forced into these freak-offs, that could be considered an element of bribery. And so you're looking at different things that establish the different elements that are required to prove a violation of a RICO Act, which is a combination of crimes. And so once again, when you're watching the trial or hearing about the trial, they are establishing a strong basis to prove the presence of multiple crimes in an organization to the furtherance of an enterprise committing a criminal act. So each one of these testimonies, even though it's been established, is important to proving the presence of that. And so past testimony can be used in that process. Situations that occurred prior to or outside of the courts, to some extent with an exception, can be used in that process. And so they can't talk about necessarily the negotiations, because negotiations generally are not brought into court, because then it would deter people from doing negotiations. But the acts and situations that she experienced in that process are important to establishing a lot of the elements that are needed to prove that Diddy was in violation of this RICO Act. So that's what you're seeing. That's what you're looking for. Keep in mind, RICO is not a one thing. It is a multitude of various crimes that come together to establish a violation of one act. So you're going to see testimony from multiple people about various different things to establish a basis for prosecution to prove that RICO was present. At this point, they've been doing a very good job, in my opinion, of setting the precedent and setting a basis to prove that there was the presence of an enterprise, and that Diddy was connected to that enterprise, and that there was a furtherance of this act, and that it occurred over a 10-year period, and there were various crimes that occurred within that act. And so, him not taking a plea deal and taking it to trial may not have been in his best favor, but we'll see how it goes. But I just wanted to kind of explain and break down what is actually happening and what the purpose of the testimonies are for.